Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura with Connect My Brain. Thanks so much for tuning in. I would really like to spend this particular podcast on defining who I am as a practitioner and to really help people understand what we do here at Connect My Brain. After 30 years of doing this work, I may be taking it for granted that people truly do understand what we do. But I do. I get feedback. I get feedback from my podcast manager to really define the words that we use. I even did a professional video in the office. And even in that mom's testimony, she wanted people to understand that you have to really dive in to understand everything that we do at Connect My Brain. So I thought, I'm just gonna tell the story so that people really do understand what it is that we do. Because sometimes I even get calls, are you a psychologist? And can you do a psych eval? And I say, no, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not doing psych evals, but I absolutely am working on the developmental journey of children, which absolutely involves their brain. And it gives me an opportunity to have a conversation with someone so that they can decide, well, wait a minute, do I need to go put a label on something, or could we first do a developmental assessment and see what the issues are? And that's at the heartbeat of Connect My Brain. So just to kind of go backwards a little bit, I actually was going to be an attorney. I was told my whole life I was going to be an attorney. And of course, I just automatically thought, okay, I'm going to be an attorney, until I became a paralegal and worked at 4 different law firms in Atlanta, Georgia, and thought there's no way in the world I could spend the rest of my life doing this. And at that time I was married, and my husband at the time was going to chiropractic school. And so I went over and got a part-time job, and I was just amazed at all this information that was available through a chiropractic education. And I said to myself, okay, there's still some sciences that I need, because if you're first going after like a political science degree, you don't get into all the sciences. And so I needed more sciences to enter the program. So I said to myself, if I can get through those sciences quickly so that I could step into the program by fall, then I will consider that this is the path I should take. Well, that was a very fun adventure. I had to take biology 2, organic chemistry 1 and 2, physics 1 and 2. I think that's it. And I did these classes in an accelerated speed of 6 weeks each. And one really interesting part, and I see all of the things that I've been through and have learned, how it has led me to where I am today. But one of the things that I decided to do in organic chemistry and physics was to create flowcharts. And I mean, back then it was like really using giant Post-it notes, but these were just giant poster boards. And I literally would put reactions and steps into a flow. And they were written in different colors depending upon what step went with what reaction or what that next step should be. So I was color coding. I was putting it into a sequence. And those are neurological concepts that I was grasping even way back then in order to help my own brain get this information in as quickly as possible. Well, it gets even more fun because everybody loved my flowcharts and everybody wanted a copy, and I could take my poster to a print shop, and I actually made $5,000. I thought that was really great. And then I was actually asked to do some tutoring for people. So here is a person I never thought that I would have that kind of capability. And I surprised myself. And it's kind of neat even sitting here talking about this with you right now, because we've recently done an executive function webinar, and some of these pieces are they're reminding me of things that I was talking about so people could understand what is executive function. And we need to understand that that too is a sequence of events that occur that bring an individual into their executive function. And you may want to check it out. We still have it available for people to actually view. So even if I pause there for just a second, because that was one of the things that my podcast manager, Marcy, talked about with me was, define the terms. Okay. Do you know what the word executive function means? So think about an executive of a corporation, and that person is going to plan and reason and execute and pull things together and have an eye to know when things need to be reorchestrated. Well, that is your individual executive functions ability. And that is executed up here in the front part of our brain by our forehead. That is where executive function resides. But no part of our brain works independently. And that is very important to understand how things come together and create circuits. So that's really what I was doing with those flow charts. I was taking existing ways of the way I looked at information, and I was pulling from it how I would be able to remember it and make sense of it by using the circuits that were already working in my brain. Now, just to kind of capitalize that a little bit, once I got into chiropractic school, this was my typical way of studying. So I would always sit in the front row. I was the nerd in the front row. I wrote like a mad girl. And then I would go home and I would condense down my notes. I continued to use different colors. Then I would put it even more condensed on a flashcard. And then I would actually, I'm going to date myself, but I would record myself on a cassette. Then I would put it into my exercise. So while I was doing aerobic activity, I would be listening to this information. So the way our brain processes information, we all have the same stuff, but we might go about it in a different order. And so I go from big picture to a smaller picture to auditory and movement. And those are absolutely different ways of processing different information. And that's the order that works for me. Now, again, you have the same stuff, but you may do it in a different order. So fast forward, I was in chiropractic school for 4 years. I was president of my class for 4 years. I am definitely an overachiever. We were really a cool class too. We had a business. We created t-shirts. We bought our equipment as a group. We bought our books as a group, and we were always saving money. And we had some classmates that had some pretty horrific events happen to them while they were in the program. And we were able to financially help them and their children at that time. So it was an amazing experience. So then we step out, we graduate, and I go into practice. And the first practice that I was in, it was a big eye opener, because when you're in school, you think if you get to adjust 4 or 5 people a day, you're on a roll. The first practice that I stepped into, it was like seeing 30 to 40 people a day. And I remember just feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm just crawling home, because it's very, very physical. I also remember that I was in a farm town, and the average person weighed 300 pounds. They're farmers. And in order to put these people in side posture, they literally came up to my shoulders on their side. So the community was very sweet. They actually built me a platform so that I could be taller, so that I could make that adjustment. That's a very fond memory. Another really fond memory in my early years is I did a lot of work with the Amish community, and they literally brought horse and buggy to the office. And then I was like, let me come out to your farm. And they did. And that's not very common. And I can remember trudging in the snow, bringing my table to the farm, bringing chiropractic care to the community. And they would pay me in chickens and sweet rolls. And, those are just memories that I will always have of the early years of me as a chiropractor. Now, if I shift forward a little bit more, I immediately had all kinds of children coming into the office, and that truly got my attention because I feel like we could use more pediatric education. A lot of the education is geared towards very gross pathology in chiropractic school for that population. And so I decided to zero in. And that began the journey of really starting to get this specialty of pediatrics. So I went in and became a diplomat in chiropractic clinical pediatric care. That was another 3 years. Then I was invited to speak for that group, and I still do today, and teach neurology. And of course, that was like very daunting at that time because in school, it was really just learning, okay, the vestibular cochlear nerve. It goes from the vestibular to the cochlear inside of the ear. And, nobody got very excited about it. And I know that I would want to do a very good job in teaching. So that dove me in to another step. And this is where I became a neurodevelopmental therapist and learned about primitive reflexes. And that was the biggest eye opener I had ever had because there was information that was actually describing how this nervous system, how the central nervous system actually gets wired up. And I can just remember just feeling like, wow, this is the greatest piece of information I could ever find. And I really started diving very deep into the world of reflexes. Now, if that's not a familiar term for you, let me use terms like withdrawal reflex. If you were to step on something, burn your arm, you immediately recoil off. Okay. Everybody probably knows the term fight or flight. That goes with your sympathetic nervous system, even if I just stay with those two. So withdrawing away from something, that is a reflex. It's the first set of reflexes that actually get laid down in the baby, in the womb. Okay, what are we withdrawing from in the womb? You're in there with amniotic fluid. So it's light touch. That is a neurological track. It's vibration. It's the whirling of amniotic fluid around that baby. And so it's our earliest defense system where if somebody comes up and they could just be an inch away from you, you really do feel them. It's as if all the hair on your body is standing up. This is so far reaching because this defense system, if a child gets stuck in early development, they lock into that defense system. Now, always remember with children, they do not have a very extensive library. And what I mean by that is think about all of the experiences that you have had as an adult. And you can certainly go all the way back to your childhood in remembering some of those things. And some of them are pleasant and some of them are not. And that too has an impact on how the brain is going to perceive its environment. Now, when you are 4, when you are 6, when you are 8, when you are 10, you've only got the experiences that you have had. Now, I do believe there is cellular energy. I believe that mommies and babies are so intimately entangled that there's many things that can be going on for that mother while she is pregnant with her baby that can then become engrammed on that baby. I also believe that the father's role, the father's connection, the father's presence, the father's support will have that same kind of impact. So when I talk about library, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about anybody that began to influence that child. And in fact, the way that we are influencing that child is not from just a cellular component, but it's also driving their subconscious mind. The subconscious mind begins the last trimester of pregnancy and goes all the way to about 8.5 years old. This is where that term, the acorn didn't fall too far from the tree, comes from, because this is what our children do. They follow us. That is the building of their library. Now, it's not just about the mind part. It's not just about the cellular part. It's also about the sensory part. So your sensory system, your eyes, your ears, your taste, your touch. For example, those withdrawal reflexes are also influencing the peripheral vision. And that peripheral vision is huge in how you see. So I'm not talking about visual acuity. That's actually central vision, and that's only 6% of your vision. The peripheral vision is 94%, and it literally encompasses that cone of central vision and then coming all the way back behind your ears. Think of it. Try to put like a green light, create a green light that you see that goes from the wall all the way to your ears. So if you and I were looking at each other right now, actively, keeping our eyes right on each other, we could still see out to the side. And depending upon how safe do I feel grounded? Where am I? Who am I? Is going to create the response of what you may see, feel, experience if somebody's coming into that green light, that peripheral vision. Now, I might just look and say, oh, okay, that's one of my team members. I'll be with you in a minute. But if you're a child who has now become relying on that defense system to feel safe, to figure out where you are, to figure out who you are, and use those components, you are going to overly react to any of those things. This is where we can understand the concept of distraction. If anything comes into that peripheral vision and I am relying on my defense system, those triggers of anything in your vision, anything in your sound, anything coming close to you is going to cause a reaction. Now, most of the time, we're going to lose eye contact. We're not going to pay attention to what's going on. But then there's another side of this. And this is the chronicity of it. And this is probably another one of the most incredible pearls that I learned through going through training for primitive reflexes, was really looking at that stress response. So when we talk about fight or flight, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about the stress response. And, sometimes I think we use that word a little too easy, like I'm pulling a tissue out of a box. But there is a physiological event that goes on when you are in stress. Your heart rate changes, your blood pressure changes, blood flow changes. You are pushing it away from the vital organs of your belly, and it is being shunted to your arms and legs, and not just the physical, but also blood flow change in the brain. We are taking it from the front of the brain and we are shifting it to the back of the brain where the cerebellum is, where the visual cortex is. Cerebellum is for balance and proprioception and coordination of many events. Your visual cortex, how you see, all that information travels completely through the brain. And now all the blood flow is there and it literally explodes the eyes so the eyes can take in more visual information. It really tunes up, brings up antennas in how we're hearing things, how we're perceiving things. So that's a huge physiological event. And this little fight or flight gets triggered. It gets triggered lots of times when children get stuck in these primitive reflexes and they're relying on the defense system all the time. They're constantly tripping back into fight or flight mode, and it wears you out. If you've been through trauma in your life, if you get to be around anything that remotely reminds your amygdala, another part of your brain, hey, this could be just like that traumatic event we had, you get triggered too. And the more that we stay in this triggered mode, we become exhausted. So over time, where we might be hypervigilant at first, that only goes on for as long as the system can keep it up. And let me tell you something, these systems are very dynamic and they're going to do everything in their power to keep you going. But depending upon how you eat, how much sleep do you get? Do you drink water? What kind of toxins are you getting exposed to? The more the body burden gets impacted, you are going to use up the fuel that should be there for energy. It's just trying to keep you preserved. And over time, that just becomes almost sometimes impossible to keep up with. Now, that's just touching on my credential with primitive reflexes. And then I got so excited because I did do some teaching at chiropractic schools and I did get my master's in sports health science with a concentration in nutrition. And that's why I really do speak a lot about nutrition. And certainly in the beginning, it was a lot of a guessing game because I hadn't had the experience yet with functional labs. But I have been doing lab work in my practice for at least 20, 25 years because I got into that very early on. And I've seen many different lab companies do many different things. And what it gives us is it gives us data. It tells us the story of what's inside so that you're not guessing. And I think that's a very important part. Here at Connect My Brain, we have a 3-tier approach. It's mechanical, like the primitive reflexes. It's chemical, which can overlap to primitive reflexes if you're having that fight or flight all the time, or you're in chronic post fight or flight all the time because you've depleted your system. But the body chemistry is so important, especially one of the things that I've noticed over the last 5 years is the kids just don't have the same level of energy as I've seen over the last 3 decades of my work. And if you don't have energy, we need to understand how that's going to impact our focus. If I don't have fuel, how in the world can I pay attention? If I want to play sports, or am I avoiding it? Am I irritated all the time, irritable? If my mood is like a roller coaster, these things are so impacted by what's going on inside of our body. And so we do a thorough evaluation. Now, there's another layer to that. So there's basic functional lab work of looking at MTHFR. I also look at COMT. These are two genetic snippets, looking at food sensitivity. Food sensitivity, some people don't believe in it. Some people do. The way I look at it is, if these tests come back and you've got a reaction going on with everything that you eat, it's not that all these foods are terrible. It's the state of health your gut is in. And it's a great way to help parents understand you could be putting all the great food in, but your child's belly health is off. And as long as they stay sick, we're running into the risk of leaky gut, leaky liver, leaky brain. And when you have other things going on, we don't need any more inflammation in our brain. And some of these kids from vaccination, they could have high levels of heavy metals. If these kids have a mutation on MTHFR, they may not be able to clear it out easily. So regardless of the decisions we make, we're also just trying to get data to see how well that child's health is. Another big area is strep. If these kids have had strep infection, strep can get up into the brain. And this leads to all kinds of different types of problems. It could be OCD. It could be mood swings. It could be focus issues. It could be chronic immune dysregulation. Now, the other half of that, so one part, they call it pandas when it has to do with strep, and these children having what they call a neuropsychiatric event following a strep infection. That can be very drastic. But if we don't get the high strep antibodies out of that child, the brain is being triggered to think constantly that your immune system should stay on. And over time, just like chronic stress, it's going to crash. And when it crashes, it really derails the life, not only of the child, but the family. Now, the other acronym is PANS, which literally goes to any other types of bacterial or viral infections that people have had. So Epstein-Barr, pneumonia, hand, foot, mouth. These things, sometimes if somebody's had what you call a neuroimmune event. So the word neuro is neurology. Immune is immune system. So if I've got an open window of neurological development and I have an immune event, those areas can get tied together and it leads to lots of problems for that child. It could be chronic illnesses. It could be chronic behavior issues. I don't like that word behavior, but I just have never come up with another word that can really help us understand what we're talking about. I truly believe that all of these children have a reason for why things are going in the direction that they're going in. This leads me to, okay, let's look at the brain. So with the brain, I'm board certified in neurofeedback, and I am also a diplomate in reading QEEG, which is the recording that you see when you do a brain map. And a brain map, you put a cap on somebody's head. It's got 19 channels, and you're picking up the electrical energy from the brain. You're not putting anything in the brain, but you're picking up the electrical energy. I love this work. This really gives me a picture. What has this child's developmental journey been like? When you come into this world, you are fully formed, but you are not fully functioning. You are down in your brain stem. You should be dominant right brain, and the brain's going to turn on from the back to the middle to the front. And depending upon the foundation, will determine how that maturation process is going to happen. Just like we've mentioned a couple of times about the executive function webinar, I really do a deeper dive into this part of it because so many people don't start to address situations until these kids are high school or college. And you always hear the story. Well, I can remember when, he was in school, when he was school age, he had trouble with this, that, and the other thing. This is the part. If there are things in your child's early development, it is going to become the role model for how that brain is going to turn on. And if development is derailed early on, the right side really gets compromised. And that is supposed to be the foundation of information that's going to go over to the left side of the brain and become the intellectual quotient. And so if the right side, being the emotional quotient, if it's dampened because something in development was derailed early on, this is the classic pattern of why so many kids have emotional dysregulation. Or even another layer, as a certified autism specialist, the other thing that I try to explain is these kids that have been labeled, diagnosed autistic, and their language is delayed, being one of the classic things, and socialization. Those are higher brain functions. And lots of times in the histories, you're going to pick up that there were events that went on when mom was pregnant with her baby. And that's actually the time that the brain is forming. And so what they have found in autism is the long nerves seem to be preserved, which go to the body, and we can move and we can walk and we can climb stairs. But expecting those higher brain functions to come online, become circuits and be coordinated, they're getting jumbled. And so looking at brain maps, that helps us see, well, are the brain waves where they're supposed to be? Now, your brain waves are supposed to be everywhere, but they do dominate in certain parts of our brain. So if I get patterns of delta, theta, alpha waves, and I'll explain that in a second, if I see those coalescing in the front of the brain where the frontal lobe is, where executive function should reside, well, it's getting squashed by slow waves. So your delta wave is 1 to 3 hertz. That's a baby wave. That's why babies sleep all the time. And then 4 to 7 is theta. And if I have an abundance of theta, then my brain is still in a 4 to 7-year-old brain. And it's lots of daydreaming, it's imagination, it's subconscious, and it's the precursor to sleep. So if I'm 8, 9, 10, that's not what I want. I really want alpha, but I don't want alpha to dominate in the front because it has an incredible phenomenon that when you close your eyes, alpha goes up because it's supposed to be in the back of the brain in that visual cortex for processing and processing speed and being able to collect resources and lock in on them. And that's what information you can gather from doing a brain map. So that is truly the journey that I have walked on that has created Connect My Brain. So when I talk about that, we look at the developmental journey. We are literally looking at the blueprint. I want to know what went on in pregnancy. I want to know, did you actually know your state of health when you got pregnant? Were you supported? Did you go through stress? I want to know what kind of care you had during your pregnancy. I want to know about the birth. I want to know immediately what happened after the birth. I want to know every developmental milestone that that child should have gone through, and did they go through it at the proper time? This is why a few years ago, our world decided to change the developmental milestones. In my opinion, I believe we normalized developmental delay. What do you mean by developmental delay? And it's not just about a toddler. This was another great feedback that my podcast manager, Marcy, gave me. She said, when I hear that word, I think of little ones. But the story could be relative to any age. For example, when I talk to an adult and I try to narrow down, what is it that you want to focus on? Well, my whole life I've had problems with concentration and focus. They have developmental delay. Something in their journey got derailed. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to see, how does it correlate to your brain map? How does it correlate to your fuel? How does it correlate? Are you exercising? These bodies will need to move for our entire life. Now, if we're talking about a child, let's take a school-age child. If that child's already been labeled dyslexic, I'll just go with that because this could run on for quite some time. But dyslexia is typically thought of only impeding reading and writing. Well, let's take another step because it's really about developmental delay. It's about that your brain didn't get organized. Here's a simple little thing that you can do. What is the dominant eye, ear, hand, and foot of your child? If it's not all on the same side, then there's chaos going into the brain. And if that is the picture that I have as my brain is coming up to a higher level of function, there's going to be chaos. And yeah, it's going to show up in reading and writing, but also how do the eyeballs move? Here at Connect My Brain, we actually do a very deep assessment on eyeball movement. It's the only piece of neurology that's on the outside of your skull. But again, remember what I said. It's the way that information comes in is by the way the eyeballs move with 6 muscles attached to each eyeball. But that information's got to go all the way through your brain. So if these pieces of my blueprint didn't go as expected, it's going to change the ultimate outcome of executive function. Now, of course, little ones, boy, if we can get to a child before they're 5, there's so much magic that can go on because they're so close to the beginning of time. So that's where you could think of a little one, and there's so many stories that I could tell you. Let me give you one example. I'm working with a little boy who does have a genetic issue, but we started, at least when we first started together, he was not even sitting up, and now he's sitting up on his own. But the other day we started talking about why is his foot having a change in its posture. Okay, he's 19 months old. He's not upright yet. He's not getting the information into his feet to begin the process of learning how to stand in gravity. And by 5 years old, you will have 3 arches develop in your foot. So if I don't get that information, I have low tone. And the feedback to the brain is low tone. And if you look at a structure called the homunculus, and I'll get Marcy to put a link in the show notes, this will give you a picture of the sensory motor cortex, where all the parts of the body are mapped out on. When you look at the midline, literally your lower legs and your feet are in the midline, which means that your legs connect both sides of your brain. So this is why it doesn't matter the age. The developmental process is the blueprint that you went through, that your child went through. Now, if you're listening to this and you're going, wow, there's so much information here, and I'd love to get to know more, we've got a great way for you to dip your toe in, and it is our parent membership. Our parent membership, and I believe we're going to change the name to the Connect My Brain membership. We're about to go through some wonderful changes on our website and how we put things together because we're always growing. We're always listening. So if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it. What do you need as a parent? What do you need as a community? We want to take care of our community, and the community is the world. We are talking to families all over the world, and we want to support you. We want to put resources into your hands. So I really encourage you, take a look what's called right now the parent membership. This gives you access to our private Facebook group called Mom's Corner. You also get access to a private podcast where I do deeper dives into different clinical issues. You also get member pricing on assessments as well as supplements as well as labs. Yes, we really want to be part of your world, and we want to help you get the data that you need so that you understand where your health is, where your child's health is. And as you get to know us, then maybe you want to take that next step. What is that next step? Come to the office and have an intensive if you live out of town. What does that mean? You literally come into town, sometimes for 4 days or 5 days, sometimes for 2 sets of 5 days. And we really dive in. When you see this video, once it comes out, this was the result of a young man working with us for 8 days, 2 times a day, and listening to the mom's testimony of how much change we actually got, which was absolutely incredible. Now, if you're local, you can just come to the office. But I would really encourage you to understand this is summertime when this podcast will actually air. I don't know when you'll actually hear it, but if you are hearing it in summer 2025, or maybe even summer 2026, think about give your child a summer program that will allow them to have a fresh start in the next school year and get a change on their life. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in today. I've really enjoyed this time with you. And as always, be blessed.